All right, welcome listeners. Excited to have one of our students here on the podcast today. So, Sophie, I'll have you introduce yourself, tell the audience when you'll graduate, where are you currently in the program, and maybe what kind of practice area do you think you'd like to practice in when you're done here at school?
Yeah, I'm Sophie Vandeloecht. I am a third semester, so technically senior. I'll graduate in 2025. Very excited about that. And I am hoping to work with adults. I'm particularly interested in veterans, in that scope. So that's my hope for the future.
Awesome. Awesome. So, in your community advocacy and leadership course, you've been working on a project, a social media campaign. So you've identified and been exploring an occupational injustice from the current events. Tell us a little bit about what you've been focusing on and what made you interested in this.
Yeah, so my injustice was the lack of affordable housing in America. And this particularly hit home for me as I will be renting here in a couple years. And so I was just really interested in looking into it, especially from the college-aged perspective. And with field work, you don't necessarily get paid. So I will be living with my parents. So like that was also an interest for me of like how much is rent? Like, do I need to start looking into this now? Yeah.
Great. Yeah, it'll be coming up sooner than you think, maybe, or sooner
I
than it maybe
know.
feels like, right? So you've talked a little
Yes.
bit about how this is relevant to you. Why is the question of housing relevant to occupational therapy today? And what makes this an occupational injustice?
Yeah, so an occupational injustice is something that um disrupts people's like normal day-to-day and causes them to kind of have an imbalance in their life. So housing is a big one because it can affect every aspect of life. If housing is too expensive, people may have to what a lot of what I found was like doubling up. So like having multiple families live in one apartment or one house, or having multiple roommates with maybe not enough space, which can also affect people's health, mental and physical. Because obviously, if there's a lot of people in one area, there's going to be a higher chance for sicknesses, colds, flus, that kind of stuff. And then it also can just affect daily routines. If people are paying a lot for housing, they may be paying less for quality food, transportation, childcare, that realm. So it can affect every aspect of people's lives.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how um, maybe recommendations when you're budgeting, like how much of your budget should be on one thing versus another. And if
Yeah.
housing takes up more than what it maybe quote unquote should be, it leaves less money in your budget for all the other things that are necessary, like utilities and, like you said, food that is high quality and
Yeah.
all of those things. Yeah, it's interesting to think about that for sure. Um, in your research, did you find that certain populations are impacted more than others?
Yeah. Um, a lot of the research I found separated poor from extremely poor, which I found interesting. And so the federal definition of poor is anybody that makes below the federal poverty line or whoever makes less than the median income of like the area, I believe. So I don't have the facts right in front of me. Oh, yes, the median area income, 30% of the median area income.
Okay.
And so a lot of people are affected by the fact that housing are so expensive. Um, and then if housing is expensive, lower quality housing is also still going to be expensive based on supply and demand. So typically, low income and extremely low income are the most susceptible to this kind of stuff.
So, from an OT perspective,
Mhm.
how do you see occupational therapy fitting into maybe addressing the housing issue?
Um, so OT can fit in like a couple of different ways. Advocating is a big one. I did a social media campaign for um one of my classes, advocacy, and that was like a big role that OT can play is um supporting by advocating at like the federal level, creating, helping to create laws and things that make it easier for people to balance housing and other costs of living. And then also interacting with homeless shelters, transitional housing, um, to kind of work with budgets too, like we talked about earlier, and creating healthy habits, and maybe addressing ways that they can do a couple different things at once, like maybe eat affordable or eat healthy but affordable, while also maybe paying a little bit more for housing, and then maybe developing different kinds of childcare, um, things like if a bunch of people in the neighborhood have like different kinds of shifts, like maybe the kids go to one house on one day and another house on another day, so that way they're not necessarily paying for childcare, but it's kind of that community aspect you're building.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about some maybe creative problem solving to help
Mm-hmm.
create low cost solutions to some of the challenges.
Yeah.
Um, did you find any specific resources that were really helpful that you would maybe point people towards budgeting? I think that seems like it's kind of a foundational piece of the challenge.
I did not find any specific about budgeting. In another one of my classes, I talked about affordable solutions for um, eating healthy on a budget. So I can send you that resource. I don't remember the exact website. I can try to find it. Um,
Yeah, I can get that link and from you after we're done recording and then post that in the link for listeners to access.
awesome.
So in your social media campaign, what types
Yes.
of things are you including in that campaign?
Yeah, so a lot of it was just kind of gauging how much people really knew about affordable housing. My audience was around my age, so high school to probably 30s, 40s. Um, so kind of gauging how much they knew about affordable housing and then giving them some facts. One fact that I found like really surprising was that not only are people not being able to afford houses, but the houses aren't even built. So then there's a lack
Mm.
of supply. So there's a shortage of 7.3 million affordable housing units, which is wild.
That is
And
wild. Wow.
the pandemic just like accelerated or exuberated, I think is the
Mm-hmm.
word, made everything so much worse. But
Yes.
that was based off of a national survey that went out. And so that was really surprising. And so it kind of just like included those types of facts and then like the impact, kind of like we talked about, like ways to advocate and then different resources within Milwaukee that people could volunteer or reach out to if they were struggling with finding the money for housing. Because I don't know, I don't think I mentioned earlier, but affordable housing, like definition wise, is paying less than 30% of a person's monthly income on housing, which is surprising based on the housing costs right now. Like a lot of people are paying half their monthly rent up to like
Yes.
80%, 90%, which leaves almost nothing left for what we said, like food,
Yeah.
housing, or food, utility, childcare, transportation, like even bus passes cost money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's a lot of different layers of that. I think the housing
mhm,
challenge is very complex on lots of different facets for
yeah.
sure. I know you talked about low income versus very low income as kind of the population that's being impacted. Have you seen statistics about specific maybe ethnic groups or age groups
Yes.
maybe that are impacted, or kind of other ways that we can look at populations who are being impacted by this?
Mhm. So I did find a statistic that of households that are considered extremely low income, 90% of those or well, not 90, 19% of those households are African American or Black, and then 17 are American Indian and 14 are Latino, compared to 6% of white households. So that was a pretty jarring statistic to come across, and definitely one that is somewhat systemic. Obviously, when housing districts were being drawn out, was still during the time in America where we were experiencing some civil rights kind of stuff, separation. And so, like, lower quality housing typically tends to be in those neighborhoods that are characteristically minorities, which is unfortunate. And so changing that is like a really big thing that we can advocate for.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you start looking specifically at the history of Milwaukee. Milwaukee area is very segregated still to this
Yeah.
day. And so I'll link in the notes some links to some different books that have been helpful
Yeah.
for me reading, kind of just to understand in our local area here what has contributed systemically to some of those divides and segregated communities. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and I'm from St. Louis, which is also a very segregated still, unfortunately,
Yeah.
when it comes to housing.
Yeah, it's really challenging to change some of those systemic things that have been around since the founding of the country, honestly. So big challenges, but everyone can take a little step at least in trying to
Yes.
help the issue. So if occupational therapists are listening right now and want to do something to kind of help or take action about this, what are some suggestions that you have for them?
One big one that I found was Habitat for Humanity has a location in Milwaukee, and they take volunteer groups to build houses for low income families. They build a lot of the single family homes or 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, so gives families a little bit more space. But yes, them, and then a lot of food pantries and soup kitchens, also like volunteer wise. It's not directly OT, but there are different volunteer opportunities that are really cool.
Great. And I'll get some links to those and put those also in the show notes.
Yep.
Yeah, Habitat has been really kind of progressive in looking at also ways to design their homes with universal design. So that families with individuals with disabilities still have access to those homes, which is excellent. I love that about that organization. So, okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about how learning about advocacy has maybe challenged you as a student. How has that been as a student? So how was the process for the social learning campaign for you? And did you have any experience with community advocacy before the OT program?
I had not had much experience with advocacy in terms of like advocacy as defined with like the social media campaign. Like I had never done something like that, but in my church we would do a lot of mission trips and stuff. So in terms of that way of advocacy, like building houses, running vacation Bible school programs in different communities. We went up to Detroit, which was like a really fun experience, and definitely like helped shift my view to it's not all sunshines and rainbows. So during the campaign, I was really interested in like kind of seeing it from like the student perspective, kind of like I saw like my age group, but it was also like as I was digging into it, it affects a lot more people than I think I initially thought. I was reading one article that talked about how like teachers and nurses and police officers, like service related jobs, are also struggling with this, which kind of blew my mind a little bit because I tend to think of those jobs as like pretty well paying. Um, but the divide between income and housing is just so great right now that it doesn't really matter if you have like a quote unquote well paying job. Um, and so like as I was digging in, I just like got more passionate about like how like housing was like such like a big part of everybody's life, but like such a like struggle to maintain. And so that was really like eye-opening for me in terms of advocacy and like made me want to like dive deeper into it as I like progressed with the campaign.
Awesome. What was the most challenging part of this project for you?
Probably figuring out what people actually need to know versus like what I found interesting.
Yeah.
Um, when I was making the campaign, it was a struggle to just like figure out like, okay, what like needs to be said versus what I like personally find interesting versus like it's not like writing a paper at all. So like it's a completely different mind shift. Because you also don't want like a lot of words on the slides because people won't read them. So you have to kind of like think from a lot of different angles. So I think that was probably the most challenging is like, what do people actually need to know? What do people want to read? How are they going to
Mhm.
view it to like make sure that my point gets across?
Yeah. Awesome. I agree. That is really challenging. And I think, as a student, especially in an OT program,
Hmm.
you're spending so much time on like how do you write notes? How do you
Yeah.
document? How do you write
Yes.
papers,
Yes.
right? But then this
Hmm.
is a totally different type of creation. And I
Hmm.
think um something that intentionally we added to the program because social media is so big everywhere right now
Yeah.
that and there's I think social media gets a fairly negative rap also about kind of how it can be used to spread fake news or
Hmm.
challenges with social things, but I also think it can be a really powerful platform to share information
Hmm.
that is not fake news, right? Like, and
Yeah.
spread awareness. And so I think I've been really excited and impressed to see the different social media campaigns that have come out of this class because I always learn something new from them also.
Hmm.
It's exciting to see them come out. What has been the best part of working on this project?
I think that the feedback from like I posted my stuff on Instagram stories. And so I think the feedback from people there has been very rewarding. It's nice to like whether it's selfish or unselfish, like it's nice to see that your work is being acknowledged.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I put a lot of work into this campaign and people responding with questions and comments and like, wow, this is like I didn't realize how much like this impacted people or like I didn't realize that this was as big as it was. I think my favorite comment was somebody had commented like, no wait, this is wild actually. And I just like laughed and it was um like just really nice for people to like I felt like it was being seen and so
Yeah.
it was nice to see that advocacy portion and like, oh wow, people are looking at it.
Yeah, like, and those kinds of comments show like it is reaching your
Hmm.
intended audience, right? Like
Yeah.
those are, um, you are educating and you are spreading awareness
Hmm.
about a really important issue.
Yeah.
So you mentioned when you introduced yourself that you're a third semester student, but at Concordia we
Yes.
offer our master's degree and a doctoral
Oh
degree, and
yes,
you are
yes.
actually one of our doctoral students.
I
Um,
am.
And so you've been spending some time developing your capstone project kind of
Hmm.
on the front end right now. Next semester will be more more involved, but can you tell people a little bit maybe about where you're going? You don't have to give specific names
Hmm.
if you don't want to, but maybe kind of what you're planning to do for your capstone project and then how this maybe ties into that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'll be working in St. Louis at an organization that assists veterans who are either at risk of homelessness or have experienced homelessness, kind of get up and running again. So when I did a needs assessment for the organization, I was able to kind of see that there wasn't a whole lot of community. And so I am hoping to build that community up a little bit. I've been researching a lot about social participation, so like having conversations, being able to actually like engage, initiate, talking and that kind of stuff. And then also the impact of leisure activities. So it's not like directly related to like the budgeting and the like working for like housing costs, but it kind of goes alongside the balance of yes, you work and you make money, but you also have to have some time to relax, to talk to people, because social isolation is a huge like detriment and like hurts your function in other areas of life. So I'm working a lot with that. And then it kind of relates to the fact that a lot of these veterans have experienced homelessness or were at risk of homelessness. So working with budgeting, they're paying a decreased rent at the organization that I'm working at. So kind of helping them regain budget strategies and that sort of thing while still managing the things they want to do is what I'm hoping to kind of work on.
Awesome. You've mentioned the word advocacy quite a few times in your description of things. I think in occupational therapy, most often OTs are used to advocating kind of at the client level, for maybe for reimbursement for a specific client, or to get maybe durable medical equipment for a specific client. But the kind of advocacy that you're talking about in your campaign is bigger, right? It's at that kind of community level. And that is something that maybe isn't an automatic piece of what OTs think of as their role or their job. If someone who's listening who has a passion for an injustice and wants to advocate, but maybe isn't sure where to start, what advice would you give for them?
I think that I would give them probably like some kind of it. Well, I would advise them to reach out to the community that they're trying to advocate for. Because a lot of my classmates were able to get specific interviews, which I think helped their campaign a lot. So whether or not it's reaching out on social media or like making a social media campaign, like I did, making sure that there's like fact checks or like other websites that people can go into, and just like finding the community where they're at and seeing like what they need specifically, is like also a really big part of it. So I'd probably advise them to do that.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, I think so many times we think of advocacy as maybe speaking for people who can't speak for themselves or speaking for someone else. And I would encourage listeners to shift that a little bit, because maybe we're speaking for people who don't have a voice or don't have the power or authority to have that voice. But I would encourage us also to really expand our definition of advocacy to be speaking with the communities that we want to see the change. I think we can often come in as the therapist, as thinking like we know what's best for that community, where that's not true, right? Like the community knows what's best for them and what they need. So I love that idea of making sure that you're aligned with whatever population or community is being impacted by the thing that you're seeing, and feel passionate about like having a call to kind of serve there. Makes so much sense to me. Awesome. So I have two questions that I ask everybody who's on the podcast. But before I do those two questions, is there anything else that you want to tell listeners about the lack of affordable housing in the United States? If they could take one thing away, what would that be?
Just that it's a lot bigger problem than a lot of people realize that it is. And so if there's ways for people to like help or advocate, or if you maybe sense um that a client or a friend or someone is maybe like cost burdened by either housing or something else, like just like reaching out and asking if they need anything, not in like a pity way, but in a like, I'm here to help you, even if it's not me directly, let me point you to like a resource. So
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
awesome. Okay, so these two questions are really more about your opinion, so it doesn't have to do anything with the social media campaign. Your answers might be related, but they don't have to be. So first question, what area of life or practice do you think OTs should have a bigger role in than they do currently?
Ooh. Um, I think going like, probably because I'm still in the mindset and I'm passionate about it, but I think the like individuals who like are experiencing homelessness, I don't think that, or I don't hear a lot of OTs involved in like shelters or transitional housing, or even, well, like some kind of supportive housing. But I think that it would be beneficial for OTs to be involved in those kinds of populations and settings, kind of more community based. I know we're kind of starting to shift that way.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, that kind of
awesome.
stuff just to help with their like activities of daily living, just like hygiene, like how can you find hygiene items when you're experiencing homelessness, or how can you like eat and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is definitely a gap in current services, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Okay, second question. What current occupation brings you joy?
Um, I crochet a lot, so that's the occupation that brings me joy a lot. I'm making like little, it's like Christmas time around, so
Yeah.
I'm making little like ornaments and stuff for my grandparents, so I'm excited. I like doing that.
Oh, how fun. How long have you been crocheting?
I started like at the beginning of high school, and then I
Okay.
kind of like stopped for a little bit, and then when the pandemic rolled around, I got back into it.
Yes, you had some extra time at
Yes.
home. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been so much fun getting to hear a little bit more about you and about the research you've been doing. Thank you for spending some time with the podcast and with our listeners this morning, Sophie.
Yeah, of
Best of luck
course.
in capstone and all the things that are on your future here.
Thank you.